The honourable member for Scarborough Southwest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every summer in my riding of Scarborough Southwest, there are some very familiar sights. Many are beautiful, images of the Scarborough Bluffs, beautiful gardens like Rosetta McLean, parks like Warden Woods, and the wonderful murals along Kingston Road, just to name a few. These sites are traditional and enduring. But in Scarborough Southwest, we now have a new familiar site we associate with the summer, the dumpster out in front of the house. These dumpsters are not there because people are doing renovations to their homes. No. They're there because residents are cleaning up their flooded basements after rainstorms. And the reason they're having to clean up is because of faulty and decaying infrastructure in Scarborough. Mr. Speaker, every summer in Scarborough, far too many people experience flooding due to inadequate and decaying infrastructure. For many, this means raw sewage and stormwater spurting out through their toilets, their sinks, their shower heads, and floor drains. In the past 2 years, over 1,000 homeowners in Scarborough Southwest have been victims of basement flooding due to inadequate infrastructure. And the impact isn't limited to homeowners either. In June 2011, less than 2 months after my election, the basement of my constituency office flooded. Cleanup costed the city thousands of dollars in order to remediate the damages done. More importantly, though, Mr. Speaker, and talking about infrastructure today, Variety Village, which is an exceptional facility in my riding that serves people of diverse needs. Many of Canada's Paralympians train there. People from all across the city make use of the facilities of Variety Village. They're largely funded through private donors, through memberships, and through the generosity of citizens and volunteer labor. But Variety Village made an application to receive some infrastructure funds. Sadly, they were turned down. And then this past summer, during the rainstorms, their roof collapsed. And that cost them $250,000 that they then had to go and raise and make insurance claims and go through all of that hassle rather than focus on servicing the needs of their members. People with disabilities, people from all over Scarborough and all over the city. But instead, they had to focus and dedicate their efforts towards fundraising to actually raise the money to repair the roof after the flooding that happened. And that's why the current infrastructure funding and plans just don't add up. There's not enough there. It's not stable. It's not long-term. And, of course, the Build Canada Fund is going to be expiring in 2014. In my area, after saying all that, my area of Toronto is not even designated as a chronic basement flooding area like many other parts of Toronto. Most of those homeowners that I spoke about must trash their belongings, make insurance claims, spend thousands of dollars fixing their basements. And many ask, how did this happen? Why us? The answer for those being affected is that much of our infrastructure is reaching the end of its lifespan. Some sewers in Toronto are 100 years old. In fact, the investment needed to maintain and replace our decaying infrastructure nationwide has ballooned to a stunning $171 billion. And that has only grown in the last 7 years under the leadership, or lack thereof, of this government. Now, current federal infrastructure funding is too little and too beholden to partisan interests and backroom deals. The ad hoc budget-to-budget funding model favored by this Conservative government is much better suited to photo ops than it is to resolving this serious national crisis. For 5 years now, the NDP has been calling for a permanent infrastructure program. Federal government needs to get serious and step up to the plate, dedicating significant resources to tackle Canada's serious infrastructure program. People in Scarborough Southwest and indeed across Canada are counting on the federal government to act on this issue and to act now. There is simply no more time to waste. Our cities face debilitating gridlock, our water and sewer systems are failing at an alarming rate, our roads continue to deteriorate, and our bridges are literally falling apart around us. Canadians are counting on this government to act, and to act quickly. And the time to act, as I said, is now. Now, the NDP is simply asking the federal government to commit in their budget of 2013 to a long-term, predictable, and accountable federal infrastructure plan. We ask this plan be in partnership with other levels of government as recommended by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. Mr. Speaker, developing a plan that would start to relieve the enormous infrastructure crisis facing all Canadians requires a government with political will. Playing politics with the fate of our infrastructure and ultimately the fate of Canadians' quality of life is offensive, objectionable, and dangerous. What we need in Budget 2013 is a long-term infrastructure plan. This plan needs to be developed through continuous consultation with the provinces, territories, municipalities, and First Nations communities. It should span a period of at least 20 years, allowing for better long-term planning and support for long-term projects. The plan should set clear funding criteria and program targets, as well as use transparent, accountable, and non-political allocation mechanisms to facilitate the submission process. The NDP would like to see a plan that encourages the use of innovative technologies that allow better efficiency and sustainability. The plan should also provide dedicated transit funds in order to reduce commuter times. And of course, Mr. Speaker, just in the GTA and around the City of Toronto, we are facing a loss of productivity that adds up to over $6 billion per year because of the gridlock caused by inadequate transportation infrastructure. And Mr. Speaker, such a plan should contain provisions for regular, frequent, and transparent progress reports to Parliament. It's interesting to note that business groups like Canada West Foundation and the Canadian Chamber of Commerce agree that public infrastructure investment is the missing link to correct Canada's sluggish productivity, and that those investments must be strategic, not political. These groups also highlight the fact that gridlock is a major threat to economic prosperity in metropolitan regions, and this is why reducing commute times is a critical component of any long-term infrastructure plan. Instead of one-off funding through an application process that is beholden to partisan interests, clear-cut funding formulas like per capita allocations will ensure reliable, predictable funding for provinces, territories, and municipalities. The federal government must commit to an infrastructure funding plan with a long-term horizon. A budget-to-budget approach is structured so that longer-term funding projects like transit don't qualify for funding. Regular reviews are needed to ensure targets are being met and investment volumes adjusted. Now, during times of economic hardship, a dedicated infrastructure bank can be used to make strategic investments that will stimulate our economy, lower unemployment levels, and make use of lower interest rates. A federal long-term infrastructure bank can give municipalities access to federal low interest rates, keeping costs low and saving taxpayers money. That's right, Mr. Speaker. It's us on this side of the House that want to see taxpayers' money spent wisely and not wasted on things like the Senate. Now, the time for the federal government to act, as I said, is now. With the Building Canada Fund set to expire in 2014, Canada's municipalities need immediate funding support to avoid missing a vital construction season. With 11,000 jobs being created for every $1 billion in infrastructure investments, job growth and economic productivity hinge on federal infrastructure funding. It is a crucial opportunity that Canada cannot afford to waste. Now, Mr. Speaker, going back to my riding in Scarborough Southwest, we have been around for well over 100 years now, where Scarborough was built up over time. Much of our infrastructure was built around the centennial of Canada, so around 1967, with many projects that happened during that time. And one such project was a large water tower that was built at Warden and Eglinton. A few years ago, that tower was in disrepair, was having all kinds of problems, and local residents' water quality was put at risk. The City of Toronto came up and they made the remediation. They went and put well over $1 million in scaffolding around this water tower in order to make the corrections and to fix the problems. And now that that investment was made and that money was spent and those jobs created, now the water supply for residents in Scarborough Southwest is secure for another 50 years. This is the kind of investment that we need to see in areas like Scarborough and indeed all across the country in order to make sure that we maintain a safe and prosperous society for the future. And of course, Mr. Speaker, as my colleague from Talbot-Blainville was talking about, we need to look forward into the future with new technologies and new forms of investment, But also, and perhaps one of my colleagues will give me a chance to answer this later on, we also have to look at new areas that are being developed and what their needs will be down the road. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire, the honourable member for Peterborough.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's interesting. I found myself agreeing with the member on a number of points. Certainly, the member suggested perhaps the creation of an infrastructure bank in Canada might be a way to move forward. I actually agree with him on that. I think there's a role for large public and private pension funds and so forth to participate in the investment long-term infrastructure. We've seen that in other places. What I'm disappointed with, and I suppose there needs to be an acknowledgement that the federal government is simply a partner in these things. When we were making record investments in infrastructure over the last number of years, we've been a partner. Certainly with GO Transit in his region, we've made many upgrades. We've partnered on many upgrades and over $1 billion going into Union Station. I'm just curious, if we put this on the table, is this member suggesting that he's going to vote in favour of infrastructure investments because they didn't vote for it in the past, Mr. Speaker?
The honourable member for Scarborough Southwest.
Well, Mr. Speaker, like any other piece of legislation or proposal that's made, I'm going to read it before deciding whether I'm going to vote for it or against it. And of course, if the government decides to wrap it up in a whole bunch of things in the budget, like cuts to EI and cuts to frontline services and cuts to food safety and other programs, I would find it very hard to vote for it. If they were to split something off and have it as an independent bill, that might make it far more easy to do. But, Mr. Speaker, and I mean, the member raised the issue of GO Transit. Yes, there have been lots of upgrades. However, unfortunately, those don't really help the residents of Scarborough Southwest because the trains during rush hour all bypass all the stations in Scarborough. They're not actually servicing Scarborough. So, in fact, if the member wants to see more improvements there, then that would be one that I would like to see.